Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar podcast. I am Clayton.
This is Beth.
And Lanina.
Katie.
Kyle.
Jesus Christ.
Jordan.
I'm Nina.
I'm sick.
And while Kyle wallows in his own self-pity, before we get started, I just want to remind all our listeners that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And our topic for today is what can players do to help the game master, which is kind of an extension of episode 9, which was qualities of good players. So I think that when I actually post this, I'm going to title it How to Be the Best Player rather than being a good player. Whenever I started doing my research for this topic, it occurred to me that game masters have a lot of advice on how they can be a good game master, be a better game master. There are entire books written on it. There are entire sections of pretty much every core book for every system on this topic. But the information on how to be a good player and how to facilitate the game from a player's perspective is non-existent in the core books themselves. I just wanted to bring that up as just an interesting little aside that I noticed.
It's not fair.
No, it's not.
I think a lot of people do kind of see it as like the game master is there to like create and facilitate and put together the game, and everybody else just needs to show up and play. And I think that, I mean, obviously you can do it that way, but I think that probably the chances of having your GM get really frustrated or burn out become a lot more likely.
Yeah, nothing burns me out faster than feeling like I'm putting a bunch of work into a game and none of the players are excited about it. That kills my enthusiasm for a game faster than anything. It kills it faster than the new shiny.
I think we can end the podcast right here and now with the following list. Shut the fuck up, get off your fucking phones, and pay attention to the goddamn game in front of you. And what do you say we quit this bullshit and roll some dice?
An angry man.
There's a little more to it than that.
Yeah, I would say as well. Those are courtesy.
Yeah.
Like, things you have to do.
Okay, baseline, do those things.
Mm-hmm.
Baseline.
That's how you be a good player. We're talking about how to be the best player.
That's how you be a good person.
It is not self-evident, though. And I think that it's highly contextual, like most things are. Like, like one thing might be have like a well fleshed out backstory that your character can, or that your GM can draw story ideas from, things like that. That might work for a lot of GMs, but if somebody's got like, their setting that they've had in a binder for 15 years that, has every little thing planned out, then they might not appreciate that you've written in this whole, weird thing that they didn't okay. There's not a clear interface for how a player is supposed to engage with these things 100% of the time.
Okay, a serious answer. I was thinking about that, Jordan. Thinking about, make a great character, well craft what you do, and that doesn't help every GM. People are different. I do think something that you can do as a player that would help in any situation, any game ever, other than my list, is to bring other players along. You see somebody who has been sitting there quietly, doing nothing. Get them involved. Get them off their phone, get them off, out of their shyness hole. Like, get them involved. Because when you have players that are sitting there doing nothing, it makes the DM maybe feel potentially bad or uncertain. It can be awkward, or it could be just people aren't having fun. And if you see someone not having fun, think about ways you can get them involved in character.
I'm personally very comfortable in my shyness hole. I need a home in my shyness hole. It's warm in there. I can listen to what everybody else is saying. It's a good place to be.
I feel like it's also good to communicate with your GM as well if you're in that shyness hole and maybe want to come out, get some ideas of how, and like kind of like stick your hand up and be like, I need some help out of my shyness hole just for a little bit. And then like, we can be like, okay, you can go back down when you're ready.
Is Shyness hole like that scene in Get Out where the main characters
sink into the floor?
No, it's not
that like the
that.
Shyness
It's like a hobbit hole.
It's like a hobbit hole.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
like
warm and
it's a
comforting,
positive
not
thing.
desolate and terrifying.
Knock, knock. Hello? Time to come out of shyness hole?
Well, I think there's sort of a hard to define relationship here when it comes to having the players to help other players drag each other out of the shyness hole, or whatever you would call it. Because
So that terminology,
I'm going to trademark the shyness.
Oh,
Shynessole.com.
That might
A subsidiary of Alien Familiar Media.
I need some sort of shyness hole t-shirt.
Yes.
our first merch. Because sometimes, a player isn't going to be able to drag them out. Like, it's going to have to be the game master.
I disagree,
That's not
actually.
true.
Completely.
I don't think so.
I think that it might even be a little better if another player does it, because sometimes when you're first starting, I experienced this, and I think I've seen other players experience it, although it's hard because they rarely talk about it. You're a little intimidated by the game master.
Right.
And you might not want to let them know, I don't know what to do. But as a player, you can kind of be like, well, I'm going to go investigate that. Let's see. And my character looks around the room, and you there, Stevenson.
Slambo.
Slambo Stevenson. That's your name, right? Come with me. Come along.
Yeah, I think that often, especially I've experienced it a bunch of times through player and GM interactions. I know if I'm like, man, I don't know what to do at all, and then the GM has created dialogue and or drags me out of this whole unsureness versus shyness whole thing. For me, it's not being shy of more like, I ran out of creative energy and now have no idea what to do with myself. Or, you've done it for me too. I know for a fact you've pulled me out of that what am I doing next kind of stage.
Well, I didn't mean so much in that, like, a player can't. I just meant more that, like, in certain circumstances, they might need that they might perceive the authority of the GM as being better to drag them out because, the world's dragging me out, not just someone in the world is trying to get me to do something.
It's easy for the shy player to become like a sidekick,
Exactly.
It's like agency by proxy for the proactive character, or via the proactive character.
Or they're just following you around, being your number two, and you're the one that's doing all the talking, you're the one, like, they might help you in fights, but, like, you're kind of acting as the protagonist of that little party there, and they're just there to be like, woo, you did it.
Or heal you.
I'm gonna heal you now.
And I think it's important to realize as well, even if you have a player who is very good at not making someone their sidekick, even still, it could be the GM that is the only one that has the authority to allow that. I want to go over there and investigate that, Slambo Stevenson. Come with me. GM's like, actually, that's something the whole party needs to be there for, but you can all go along. Or like, it could be one of those things where it requires an authority to make that little story bit happen or whatever as well.
If we could, I think we should step back for a second. We might circle right back to the same place we were. But, well, I just wanted to brainstorm a little bit on what are those tasks, tasks is a good word. What are those tasks that every GM has to perform, or content they have to provide that players can easily help them with? Like, what are the stress points here that can be alleviated by player action?
Yeah, you're hitting on a kind of a distinction that I kind of wanted to make in this topic, which is stuff that can be done during the session, stuff that can be done after the session, and definitely during the session, a huge mental drain on the game master during a combat is initiative. Keeping track of initiative. Even keeping track of the hit points of the monsters. Those are things that players can do. They just count up, and whenever the monster has reached a certain benchmarks, at 10 hit points, let the game master know. Let them know when they hit 20, 30.
That's a good idea. That preserves the mystery.
Yeah, I've never actually thought about doing that either.
Something else that could be done during the session, and we've kind of alluded to that as far as bringing people along, is just do not split the party. I know last time I gave the advice of like the one instance when you should split the party, but yeah, never split the party except in that one instance that I've already outlined. Because that is such an enormous mental drain on the game master to balance not only what's going on in two different locations, but eventually you will get to the point where there's some sort of issue with time.
Mm-hmm.
Some group is further ahead in time than the other group. And then you run into continuity issues when the group that is so far ahead in the timeline, they're so far ahead, and the group that is behind has something that they really need somebody from the other group for.
Mm-hmm.
A combat breaks out, and then you've got to explain.
Have a healer.
Right.
So I think it's sort of that the players need to be managing their own sort of party affairs and like keeping the unity of the party together, because that I guess shouldn't necessarily fall to the GM. Like, don't get me wrong, I think that sometimes the GM needs to step in and say a final say on something, but for the most part, players kind of need to keep their own affairs in order and know what they're doing.
Kind of going back to the whole sidekicking issue, I've never seen sidekicking be that negative thing where it's just the person being brought along. It has happened where the person being brought along is more passive, but on some level, that is engagement of the group. That is bringing everybody together. That is bringing the story to the mass of people around the table. And that's not something that the game master can easily do. But if a player is willing to do that, that helps out the game master every single time.
I'm going to go back to splitting the party for a hot second. I'm a game master who is not vehemently opposed to party splitting, and here's how I make it work. This one weird trick players do. But then I want to ask a question about, and this does relate to our topic, about one problem I have not been able to solve. If you think of a video game, in a lot of ways, you will explore a linear video game's routes, and you'll come to a branch, and you'll go down one path, and you think, this looks like it could go on. I'm going to go back to the fork and try the other route. Oh no, this one actually goes on. Okay, I'm going to go back to the fork, try out the first route. Yup, it dead ends, and there's some ammo. That was a waste of time, but I feel accomplished. No, I love that. That's how I play games. It's very neurotic.
It comes from Final Fantasy for me.
And you actually, legitimately, you might find more than just a useless item. Like, that's a cool way to, if you're a completionist, discover secrets in a video game. So I take some of those principles into RPGs when I DM and allow players, there's a horror one-shot that I've ran 4 times now for 4 different groups, same one-shot. And I basically have this mental map of it in my head and allow players to get to certain points before they realize, say it's like 2 here and 2 there. The 2 players that are there will find a door or something, some enemy, something like that I invent different every time that is pretty damn obvious. Oh, we need the other players for this. And so they'll have to get back together and come back together. They can map out an area quicker. I find that a lot of new players just kind of want to naturally go off in pairs and split up. Maybe it comes from like horror movie tropes. I don't know. So it seems to work okay, except I do worry that unless I'm very vigilant about bouncing back and forth between the pairs, and this works great sometimes, terrible other times, people get sort of, foot tappy and watch checky, and they're waiting for their pair's turn to go. Or if they're off by themselves, which I do try to avoid that, they're waiting for their turn to go. I'm wondering, as someone that, I don't want to stop doing this, but I would like to find a way to make sure players aren't bored. How could players make sure that they're engaging somehow in that situation? Any ideas?
I also am sometimes a fan of splitting the party up, at least into 2 groups, because a party gets really, really strong, and eventually it becomes a real difficulty throwing, reasonable challenges at them. And so I think what's optimum in those situations is leave party A with a really difficult thing that they need to discuss and argue about and, figure out their game plan. Jump over to party B while A is hashing all that out, and then throw some shit at party B, and however long, bounce back and forth between them. So I guess that part's on the DM to throw something at somebody or at some subgroup that is not, here's the self-evident best strategy.
Requires deliberation.
I was also going to suggest leaving with like a puzzle that they need to figure out in some sort that they can like talk about on their own while the other party does something.
Yep.
I think sometimes, from a game master perspective, you have to split the party. In a scenario I just thought of is you're in a foreign enemy base and it's going to set to self-destruct, but there's evidence you need in here, and the space is huge. You can't really run around as one big whole group. You're not going to have enough time to do everything you need to do. So that's a situation I think of where, the GM has to sit down and be like, all right, they might split into like 3 groups of 2, and that's a lot more pressure on me. But ideally in that situation, you're then able to like isolate, okay, well what I have to do is Group A is opening this door, Group B is opening that door, Group C is opening that door, and you're just managing essentially a door simulator, and so in that regard at least, it's a bit easier. Ideally there's not too much combat. You're not having to, like, over-exert yourself. But you're able to sort of... I guess what I'm getting at is if you're going to split the party, keep what the party's doing simplistic, or, as Jordan said, like, give the first group, like, a huge moral quandary that they have to spend, like, 30 minutes discussing while the group B, is fighting their way through the corridor or something. I was just going to say, I don't know if you being like, all right, I got 3 groups of 2, and Group A's fighting a griffin, and Group B's, they're swimming. I don't know where they're going. They're going somewhere. And, and Group C's having an existential crisis. That's fine. And then you're managing 3 very different things, and I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like
it's worth the caveat that splitting a group and then having 2 combats running is a nightmare. But pursuing out-of-combat stuff, I think, is legitimate and difficult, but I think worthwhile in a lot of circumstances.
I think it can very much work in exploration, especially. And to bring all of this back to the topic of this podcast, what can players do? If your DM gives you a moral quandary or a puzzle to solve, and then says, you guys talk amongst yourselves, I'm going to bounce over here for a second. Okay, so back to the swimming. Why are you swimming? If you're that first group with the task, like, do the damn task. Actually talk about it.
Yeah.
Come up with a fucking consensus. Don't just wait until the DM bounces back to you to be like, what have you decided?
What was the question again?
And it sounds mean. It sounds like I'm being a dickhead, but that's...
No, I think you're asking a really reasonable thing in this situation.
Yeah, keep playing the game.
Yeah. I guess, and that also can be a bit scary. Like, wait, we're supposed to play the game without the DM here? Wait, flight instructor, why are you getting out of the plane? But that's what you gotta do. You gotta kick off those training wheels.
And I think that comes with experience.
Sure.
The more a group has either played together or played games, the easier it's going to be for the GM to be like, all right, you guys talk about why killing this zombie is an ethical issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then meanwhile, you're sitting over there being like, your paladin's like, it's an abomination, and the cleric that for some reason has a heart of gold is like, no, I can save him, and they go back and forth, and they don't need the GM to be there to be like, yes, tell me more. Yes.
Yeah.
What do you say? Like, they can just have that conversation themselves.
It's one of those core player attitude things that we've touched on a lot in this podcast. Like, you can look at it as, like, I'm sitting back and the DM is there to do some kind of monkey dance and entertain me for 4 hours. Or you can look at it as, like, something that you're contributing to is, this
it's
collective
collaborative
creation.
storytelling.
Yes.
The collaborative monkey dance.
Yeah. It's all monkey dance
Everybody
together.
join the monkey dance.
Monk Arena.
Okay. 2 out of 10, moving on.
I think the general consensus is that, splitting the party is inherently bad if your GM doesn't want it. But if your GM throws you in like 8 different places and splits your party up by themselves, then I say, go with it. But when there's like 2 of you wanting to split the party of like 7 and nobody else is willing to split, you might just have to buckle down and decide not to do that thing.
I'm going to say really quick as a caveat to that, if it is vitally important for your character, if you're having some like if the entirety of your character is on the line over a decision and you have to split the party over that, it sucks. But I'm going to say, like, at least talk to Jim about it first, sort of try to work out like an arrangement. But if you can't, don't not stick with what your character would do.
Chances are, if you've got a character and the entire game they've been looking for their sibling, and you're in the final dungeon, and the GM tells you, hey, your sibling is in that room, And the rest of the party's like, no, we gotta stop the dungeon lord, dude. We gotta go over here. We gotta go over here and kill him. But my Sib's in there. Just go to them. Go to them.
If your party's not willing to, like, work with you on your main character plot at all,
Right.
that's kind of sucky.
Like, if you've been doing that the whole game, then people are gonna understand.
I want to go back to what Nina started, or what she said, because it's what I was getting ready to say about splitting the party. Whenever the game master does it, it's a part of a plan. Whenever there's a time limit, and you've got to divide your resources so that you can get it done within the time frame that is set. It's part of the plan. The reason why I say never split the party is, as a player, is because when the players decide to do it, it's not part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's not part of the plan, in real life, yeah, splitting up does get shit done faster. But in the game, in the meta game, it takes longer. Because you have groups of people who are having action and groups of people who are not having action. You have people who are engaged in the story. You have groups of people who are not engaged in the story. Whenever you split the party, that is fundamental with splitting the party. There's going to be division in the action.
It's like you're having your time that you have to do anything.
Exactly. The game master is there, and they are playing a 4-hour session. Every other player there, they're either in Group A or Group B, so they're only playing 2 hours that session because the game master can only focus on one group at a time whenever the players are the ones who decide to split the party.
Unless they have some shit to do while the other group is getting GM time.
I don't see that happening very often.
I love this, like, minor consensus of, like, always get your GM's consent to split the party, you know? Just consent is always important.
You could always, like, a lot of the, like, things that you could do as separately, you could always go back to as a party later, and it would still get done faster. As long as it's not like, you have to do this alone, and then you may as well just go and bounce off and have, like, a one-on-one session with the GM instead of, like...
Instead of making everybody else sit around and wait, yeah.
And to KD's point of, if there is something that's just core to your character that you would split from the group, in this instance, to go do that thing, be prepared to deal with that downtime. That time of not being the center of attention, because the Game Master has to deal with the majority before they deal with you. A lot of my advice goes back to instances where a player has not had this mindset, has been very greedy as far as the time with the Game Master. A lot of my examples just go back to me thinking about the worst player that I've had in a particular situation. It's not always the same person.
Not the tick.
It's not always
No,
the same person.
The tick was just that one time.
Yeah.
I think your statement there, Clayton, segues into another good piece of player advice. Be prepared and, in fact, enjoy the fact that you are not always going to be the center of attention. Give it up. The limelight. There's a lot of limes to go around. I can't hold all these limes.
Pick up limes.
Pick up limes? You're just throwing out puns that don't seem like... Are you hitting on me? Katie's right there. But yeah, don't hog it. Don't be a greed or a greedo.
Greedy person.
Greedo.
Another reason why I don't like to split the party, and so going back to your example, Jordan, of giving the players something to talk about while you're dealing with the other party, is sometimes, like, if I were to run a Game Master class, this would be one of the first lessons, is to let the players speculate. Listen to what they are saying, because they are going to give you the best story.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're just spitballing. They're just saying everything that could happen and everything that they think would be really cool if it happened.
Yeah.
They're a think tank.
So for the players, actually speculate out loud. Don't
Don't
be
worried so much that it's going to sound stupid or whatever, because you never know what might... you might see something that actually is stupid, but, like, sparks a really cool idea with the Game Master, so...
Like, it's all fictional, so it's all theoretically, made
anything's
up.
theoretically
Yeah,
possible.
anything's possible here.
Yeah,
so.
you're already playing a game where you're like playing pretend and fighting dragons. Like nothing's gonna sound dumb. That's fine.
Clayton, if you do run this class, you should call it a Master Game Master Masterclass.
You gotta say that at least 4 times in the intro.
How much work did it take off of you when we collectively created Abena?
And let's see, we spent 2 sessions on Abena. That was about a total of 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought it was 3. No?
No,
It's
it
only
was
2.
So that was about 8 hours. I typically spend probably 16 at least in world creation. So you guys cut my...
Half.
Oh man, congratulations everyone.
You were actually useful instead of hurtful for once.
And that world prep is done outside of the game. So that's in addition to coming here and meeting with you guys. So really that was 16 complete hours that you totally saved me because we were playing the game all together as a group whenever we were making it.
Man, we found like the perfect way to make an RPG. Congratulations everyone.
I wouldn't call it
Weird and
perfect.
weird and hodgepodge as the world is. It works.
I was thinking about, like, that idea of offering to make, like, maps or timelines or different things for the group that, you know, with whatever information, like, you're privy to as a player. Like, that was one of the things that Jordan did for Abena, was took it upon himself to put, you know, all the world creation together in a timeline. I don't know how many times I've heard from Clayton how much he appreciated that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I haven't heard it.
I guess showing investment, since we're kind of transitioning, it sounds like, to outside of the game stuff. Showing that you're invested even when the session's not happening. It's good. Even if it's just like, if you're playing once a week, maybe one other day you're not playing, drop a line to the GM, talk a little bit about the game, just show some interest, you know, talk about characters or NPCs or like events, or even like builds, like, oh, I don't feel like my build right now is working out, I'd like to maybe retool it or something, you know, it's showing that you're thinking about it, you're not just showing up and then putting in your 4 hours and being like, okay, that's...
One thing I really liked about this Abena game that we did is that everybody had their race or their land or whatever that they kind of had a domain over and could do whatever they wanted in there. And so it was pretty clear cut, like what people could make up, what kind of, you know, artistic license they had over particular parts of the world. And it was segmented off, so, you know, people weren't stepping on each other's toes or whatever, but it was defined enough that if you wanted to be, you know, creative with whatever weird thing you've come up with, we all had that opportunity.
Even if it's not, like, you're not comfortable, or it's not a kind of game you're playing where you can create maps or timelines or art, something as simple as taking notes during the game is generally great advice. Not only do you need someone, or multiple people for that matter, don't just pick some poor soul to be your group's accountant
Or scribe.
or scribe, but also take notes on what your character is doing, people they meet, things important to them.
Thoughts?
It really makes me as a GM feel great when I see players taking notes, and when I don't have to remind them every 5 minutes of names. It really makes the GM feel fucking like $1 million. Which isn't that much in today's economy.
No.
I mean, I'm glad though, because I'm constantly taking notes during Eclipse phase.
Yeah.
You just have so much information.
I
I would never want to leave all of that.
Well, that's
for
because
you.
the Eclipse phase notes are nearing the actual length of the text of the itself.
Yeah. I'm gonna need a post-it note wall with, like, yarn and
You're gonna
stacks.
connect the
I would love
conspiracies.
nothing. I would love nothing more than to see somebody create a conspiracy post-it note wall based on my Eclipse phase game.
About Vivix, like it's easy. You could do that.
I have a stack of character sheets. Many of them came from people leaving them at my house after games. And I love seeing notes. I love seeing what people write down, what they think's important. It's really cool. It's a little time capsule.
I feel that drums.
Yeah, I love on, like, in Abena, all the little doodles and the notes that you guys write on your character sheets or on the backs of the handouts that I give you. I go over those and I mine those for ideas. Because sometimes you speculate about what's going on, and sometimes it's a better idea than what I had.
So I have one that I think may expose some ideological differences in the group.
Uh-oh.
Controversy.
Controversy.
Do tell.
Oh, shaking, I know.
Danger.
As I was thinking about things that I could talk about for the podcast today, I was trying to kind of figure out how I could talk about sort of the power dynamic between the game master and the players. And so something I think that helps a game master in the game, if you're a player, is to... What?
Well, one has master in the title, so they're clearly gonna fucking lead. And the other person, they just gotta submit, man.
Can we let Kyle talk?
Fuck, guys. Jesus.
Please.
I was cackling silently. You could have ignored me.
Yeah, I guess I could have. Okay. What was I saying?
This is all getting edited
Power
out.
dynamic.
So,
dynamics.
yeah, like, fucking, God, the game master is not the end-all, be-all. I mean, he is, or she is, but the player, you should push back. You should give criticism, and not, like, criticism, and don't be an asshole. But if you have a problem with something that's happening, or it makes you uncomfortable, like, give pushback. You know, if you have a good idea, you should say, hey, what do you think about this? Like, how do you feel about this? Here's a creative idea I had, because it is collaborative storytelling. And in the end of the day, yes, it is the game master's universe. But if the players are just totally submissive and don't say anything and just sort of follow the carrot as it's dangled along, I mean, you're just writing a book. Mm-hmm. You're not playing a game. And when I, heard the title of this podcast, I was like, well, I think that's something that should be kind of explored a little bit, because if players are just bending over backwards to, just make the GM's life so much easier and, to do all these other things, you're losing out on the collaborative storytelling aspect of playing a D&D game. Mm-hmm. I feel like.
So essentially, talk to your GM in general.
Don't be afraid to give pushback, because the game wouldn't exist without the players. And I've said this. Clayton and I had this discussion on another podcast, but it's a two-way street. The game wouldn't exist without the game master, but the game, it goes the other way too. If you're not having fun, that's probably something that needs to be talked about. I feel like
you're talking about feedback, and it's kind of unfair, because a lot of game systems give a mechanism for the GM to reward players. Here's a Benny, you did something cool, here's some extra XP, whatever. But I'm not going to give you a fucking Benny.
Except for that time that I legitimately did.
Oh
anyway.
My god, traitor.
I know, I'm sorry. It's really good.
What the game master gets is our suffering. Don't you remember?
Well, I mean, that's another trope altogether. That's...
I've seen the looks on their faces. I know that they love to watch us suffer.
They also love to watch us wonder and explore and learn and have a great time.
Jordan played me like a fiddle. He
okay, so this is coming over some bitterness you have, and Jordan.
Clayton's done it too. So I bet you Kyle has as well. And I know for a fact Katie has.
A soul.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Kyle's never hurt anybody in his life.
Sometimes I wonder, when I've run games, if it would be useful to pass around a anonymous survey and get some kind of IMDb rating for how good your session was.
Surveys you have to take after taking a class about your professor.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really stressed about
something like that.
GM evaluation surveys.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I don't know about going that far, but I really do think that I've been in situations where the game master wanted us to write a book, essentially, and being in that situation, it's not, you feel powerless and useless, and you don't feel like there's any point in you playing in this game if everything is preordained anyway. What's the point of that? And that's why you need to be able to give pushback, and the GM should hopefully not take that as, oh, you're attacking my world, or you're attacking me as a person, or you're attacking the way I run games, because ideally it's not any of that. It's just remembering that you're all in this together.
Nobody's perfect, not even your GM.
Nobody's perfect.
I'm just curious, what are some ways that the players can do that? Because we joke about performance reviews and giving bennies to the game master, but how about some serious ways you can do that? Let's assume the game master is a normal person and not a megalomaniac or an asshole. So it's a normal situation and you have some opinions as a player and you feel like your agency's being taken away or something like that. We talk about that a lot. What are some ways you can bring that up?
Talk to your GM after the session.
I think that's a big one, is if you're in person, maybe take them to the side and say, hey, this is some thoughts I had on the session. These are a lot of things I liked. These are a lot of things I wasn't so fond of. Let's sort of talk about it together, find the middle ground, see what we can do to improve that going forward. Also, during this, and this is more during the session, if something's really making you uncomfortable, or it's just something that's really getting under your skin, maybe call a timeout and break the world for a second and say, hey, we need to have a quick discussion about this.
Or text your GM in the middle of a session.
If you don't want to have it be a big public thing.
Or you could send like an email after the session of like, you could write it out of, that way you can organize your thoughts and you don't have to, because sometimes talking to people one-on-one is hard. You can't get all of the thoughts that you're thinking out because you can't remember them all. So typing helps a lot of the time as well.
Emails are fantastic. Clayton, that trove of stuff you gave me for Apocalyptia, like, I cherished that stuff. That wound up being like maybe a third of the campaign was like the stuff that was created in just like email strings. That stuff's great.
The hardest thing for any creative person is creating in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, especially at the very beginning of a game, that's exactly what the Game Master is doing. They're creating in a vacuum. Anytime you can get any sort of feedback, good, bad, just things that didn't work out, things that did work out well, it puts context on things for the Game Master when they're moving forward, when they're creating things that come up. Every single time, if you've got something to say to the Game Master, say it. And I realize as I'm saying this that when I'm giving advice on how to deal with players, I'm giving advice on how to deal with the worst players. But whenever I'm giving advice on how to deal with Game Masters, I'm saying exactly what I want everybody here at the table to do to me.
So if I was there, what would you do to me? Quote, every fuckboy.
Oh yeah, and then what, winky face?
Oh god.
And I realized too that like, this whole idea of write out a dissertation email and send it to your game master and make like a review seems a little silly, and you don't have to look at it like that. But like, if it's an online game, maybe go on Facebook Messenger or email, whatever you use, do that whole thing. And in the same vein, don't be like, wow, in a combat, my character died, and there was no bullshit rolls involved, like it just happened, that was the way the dice fell and the mechanics went. That sucks. But you shouldn't then just immediately turn on, the game master and berate them for that, necessarily. Now, if there was total bullshit involved, and that there was a bunch of other crap happening, then maybe there's some wiggle room there for you to, have that discussion, but...
Can we get into dice rolls for just a second? We've been talking about a lot of, meta game sort of stuff, but you brought up dice rolls. Holy shit, if you want to help a DM, learn the goddamn game that you're playing.
That's a fair point.
Know the fucking rules, know what you're going to do next turn, and know what all your modifiers are, and whatever. Be ready to go. That's gold.
Combat is already long enough. You don't need to be, every single turn being like, alright, what does sweep do again?
Yeah, how do I disarm?
Yeah,
I need to grapple his left leg, and I'm turning it counterclockwise.
Now, if you're doing 3.5 grapple rules, then you might have to ask every turn.
Yeah, is he flat-footed?
But
Is this a ranged grapple?
how many
Are you using your net?
rolls of magic missile do I get at base wizard level 1? Yeah.
But on the counterpoint of that, don't sit there confused and unsure of what you're doing. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new, or even if you just haven't caught the grasp of anything yet, write down how to do it. Just make sure you ask and get clear explanation of how to do a specific role, or why the boss is doing what they're doing, or why your character is affected the way they are. If you just sit there confused, it makes it harder for you and the GM.
And maybe take a note of how you're supposed to do it so that you don't have to, because I don't think it's that first ask. I think it's the 5th or 7th or 20th that really gets to people.
There's not that many rules that apply to a given character. Everybody's got their shtick, and they know what they're going to be into.
Unless it's a close face.
The archer is probably not going to need to be a master of the grapple rules.
Yeah.
But
yeah, if I'm grappling, it's already over.
Yeah, something's gone wrong a long time ago.
One or all of us made a mistake.
I did have a thought that occurred. If you're, a veteran player and you've been playing for a while, but you have a new GM, be nice, be lenient. Sometimes they're going to fuck up pretty hard. But, help them through it. Especially as a player who's GM'd the game before, help them understand why doing that specific GM thing is actually helpful. And, as somebody who hasn't really GM'd that much, I know that that's what I would want. But there are people out there that would just willingly be assholes and be like, sorry, that's wrong. Can't you get this straight? And be rather rude. And I think that would be pretty awful.
I think most of our suggestions can probably boil down to take a pillow and smother your ego to death,
Yeah.
and then have fun from there.
Destroy it completely. Not even, like,
Just obliterate
your ego.
Yeah, become one with the collective.
D&D. Hashtag time to swallow your damn pride.
What about character backstories, though? I remember when I was playing 2nd edition D&D, it was like part of the fucking job when you make a character that you gotta have like a 1-page backstory minimum. And figure out who your parents are, where they're at, if you had any siblings, if you had some friends, nemesis, whatever.
Tragedies.
Like,
Stuff for the game master to factor into the world.
yeah,
I
you
think
don't have to
backstories
make
are
them all,
cool.
but have some names at least and some general ideas. We did a little bit of that in Abena, but not a ton.
I think that's because it was so hard to make the backstory of the world that we might have all just been creatively empty at that point.
You're probably right.
We
We're
as a
all
group-
orphans without any friends until we met each other.
Yeah.
Well, I did give a very focused, character information sheet that you all did fill out
That's
with
true.
interests, things that were most important for your character. I think as long as you give the game master some sort of jumping off point, it doesn't have to be a full page written up thing. It could be just bullet points of the most important things to the character. That's plenty.
And it's alright to make it big enough, too, that, the game master can plug it into their world however it works. You don't have to come in with this huge, in-depth knowledge of whatever world they're making. I have 2 parents that are from a merchant class. Well, that could be in any universe, in any setting,
Yeah.
I
that's
grew up in
enough to work with.
I grew up in insert small town here.
Yeah, exactly. It's enough to make it so that the GM isn't then, forcing NPCs to attach to your character, or, some other sort of very forced thing that sort of brought up upon.
But if you want to do, an extensive backstory and you've got that kind of time and creative energy, especially if it's a world that's already pre-created, don't make something new. Don't make it harder for the GM. Use the world that you were given and build off of that. You can add, new elements here and there, but don't create, a whole new continent that the GM doesn't even know about, and now they have to think up more about this continent.
Unless they want you to help flesh out the world, I feel like.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If the world is already given to you... And
Right, don't just all of a sudden be now there's this.
Yeah.
It makes it just sound like cringy fan fiction,
Right.
You have to be that edgelord that creates your own fucking island.
My coven of vampires.
Right. I
Where all the vampires are attracted to me and me alone.
Oh my god. I think as a group, we rarely anymore, if ever, play games in very established settings. And so a lot of the times we as a group do end up creating kind of the universe, or our creative energy is tapped by the time it comes around to our character, and so we just kind of think of a profession that we do and that's it. I think I'd like to see us try. Then again, it's also hard to find an established universe that all of us like a lot. We're not all Star Trek fans,
We've done
sadly.
some Star Wars from time to time.
That's true.
You guys all
That's
sat
true.
through my one shot. That had a pretty established universe.
Sat through. We loved your one shot.
Yeah,
Well,
we really did.
that's
It was
nice,
great.
guys.
I wish I could have made it. There was a foot of snow in my
I
driveway.
know. I had your whacked out PTSD clone trooper ready to go,
I
Jordan.
was real
I don't
bummed.
think I've ever made it for a
Everyone's-
Star Wars game.
Yeah, I want to point out, though, that we are all very lucky, and not so long ago, I remember being in a situation where I was not this lucky, where a lot of players are jumping into an existing group, knowing nothing about the game, knowing very few of the people involved. Yeah, we are lucky enough to have known each other and played multiple games with each other and whatever.
Didn't start
But-
off that way, but
I know.
Right, yeah, we've...
Boy, howdy.
Yeah, it's a hard-fought group of friends here, I
it's
guess.
actually hard
But-
to remember when we all first started. I
No,
can't-
it's not.
Yeah.
It's
I
not
remember
hard for me
the
to
first
remember at all.
Apocalyptia game you ran, Jordan. You had us all type up a 1.5 page backstory about who our character was before the world went to hell and
Mhm.
that sort of thing.
As a new player into an existing group, it's really difficult to get a feel for what the general vibe and style of the world and the group and story and all that is. I've been in that situation a lot of times, and it's easy to make a sore thumb kind of character totally unintentionally. So I don't know if if you guys have any thoughts on how to alleviate that for somebody that's just wandering into an existing thing.
Find the biggest, baddest person you see, and naked wrestle them.
Well, I think that it's okay to ask other players in the group maybe and just get like a vibe. But if you really if that's something that you don't want to do or you don't have time to do that, I would say either go with the old mainstay of play yourself, because ideally they're not going to think that you yourself are a sore thumb in this universe.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope. I don't know why that would be.
Unless you're playing yourself in a D&D fantasy type world, then it's just yes, here I am, modern day self in this new fictional world.
Humor means personality.
I know, it was a joke.
The laughter! I'm laughing so much.
Who would do that?
Or play a trope.
I think you can also. My first statement was a joke, but do find someone in the group that you find interesting, and learn about their character. Ask them, and then either make someone who might get along with them or who might not get along with them. And then you'll kind of have an interesting person. If you're totally lost, you could either build along with their faction or ideology, or don't be a dick, but you could kind of butt heads a little bit. That's always cool.
Now, hopefully you don't pick the one player that seems to pop up in certain games that's just everyone looks up to me and everyone likes me, and then you're the odd guy out that's God, I really fucking hate that guy. It'd be awesome. Worse.
Do that.
Create a backstory with somebody else. I think that's super helpful, and I've definitely done it before. It's very helpful to be teammates, partners, siblings.
Takes a lot of work off the DM. Don't make them work to get you into the group.
Yeah. But I know a lot of entering a new group is more of a personal, barrier of struggle of creating new friends, and that, ceiling of making yourself feel included, but I feel kind of latching on to somebody else and using them as a helpful aid up until the next game where you can create your own existence in the world. It's very, very helpful.
I was going to ask Clayton, what, in your opinion, is the most difficult thing as a DM? That a player could help with? The thing that either takes the most time or the most mental resources or whatever. What's the hardest?
It's the advice I gave about helping out in combat, tracking initiative, keeping track of the hit points of the bad guys. That's where...
Stuff.
That's the minutia is where I lose track of my focus. I lose track of kind of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the best place for me.
The stuff I appreciate is the story seeds. I can usually handle the mechanical stuff pretty good, but when NPCs or when players are coming up with NPCs or here's a thing I want to go do, a month from now or whatever, sweet.
Mm-hmm.
That's some shit I don't have to worry about.
Yeah, when the players engage with an NPC, that is always a game of gold.
Yep. What about you, Kyle? You're pretty great at everything, aren't you? You don't really need any players' help.
I was I can just sit here and run a game by myself.
God, that was so cool.
Can you all just leave me alone?
I think for me, some of it comes from keeping track of, in the vein of what you said, Jordan, but less so story details and more specific details. There are times when I'm improvising and I maybe will forget a certain NPC name or an event or this clue in the mystery or something, just because we ended up in a place where I didn't plan for, and I'm busy running the rest of the game. I can also keep my own notes of all this other stuff I'm having to come up with on the fly. Mm-hmm. So if the players are easy to remember it and then sort of feed it back to me later on through the game, that's so good. That's perfect. It's fantastic. For me, at least. God knows I end up in situations where I'm on my own and have no plans, and I'm well, I'm just making things up as I go along. All right, so just please help.
Yeah, I think if the DM wants good help from the players, they need to be upfront about where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, what their expectations are, and how players can plug in to assist in that. It's going to be different with every single person that runs a game and every group of players that you're with, but there's some way that you can create a complementary symbiosis there. I
Yeah, because each one of these things is going to be different. Like, even what seems like we're saying are fairly cut and dry things, like, don't just write a book and drag the players along. Like, that might be what some people enjoy. Just kind of like a basic choose your own adventure novel kind of thing, you know? So it hugely depends. The important thing is just figuring out what gets everybody having fun. And to make sure that includes the GM. That you're not just leaving them out because they're just there to facilitate you.
Solve puzzles. Don't just expect everybody else to solve puzzles for you.
Is that a targeted insult? Okay, I see. I'm pretty notorious for whenever a puzzle comes up, just kicking my feet back and be like, all right, you guys got this.
It's not just because you played a barbarian. Like, this is
no,
an ongoing
I'm
thing.
really bad at puzzles IRL.
Bad at puzzles.
And so when a puzzle comes up in a game, 9 times out of 10, I'm like,
I gotta pee.
Whatever. This seems like a great time to go for a walk. But,
I'm with you. I hate puzzles. As a game master, if I have to use a puzzle, I use a pre-established puzzle. I can't think of the last time I created a puzzle on my own. It's probably been 15 years or more.
I just bring a bunch of those crack-a-barrel pin games. You know, make the peg go from one side to the other.
Just throw a Rubik's Cube at your players and be like, have fun. That's the mythical, fucking...
Cube of
Dark Orthus.
Even if you're bad at puzzles, like, causing distractions for the other players and or the GM just makes it harder for everybody to solve the puzzle, continue the plot, and the GM who spent time on this puzzle, even if it may or may not be pre-created, like, it just wastes time to, like, bullshit around a puzzle. And I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves around that. If I were to work really, really hard on this, like, maze, and everybody's just like, let's just plow through the walls.
I've done that before.
Yeah.
I'm feeling kind of alone here because I really love puzzles.
I love puzzles. I'm much like Katie. I don't interact with them a lot. So this is silly, but like as one of the newest players to this group and whatnot, I'm afraid of seeming dumb if I like come up with the wrong thing. I don't know.
I understand.
So like,
I have that problem.
You have to just fully acknowledge, like I've done for myself, that you are dumb. At me, I'm dumb.
No.
Once I embrace that, then I just say whatever the fuck comes to my mind.
All you have to do is remember the time we just took a bunny and used it to solve every puzzle.
A floating bunny.
A floating bunny.
Which I can't believe we lost.
It was a wild hair.
That was Haley's fault.
That's right.
Taking Clayton's side here. That was not a bunny.
Bernard, if you may.
A wild hair.
Doesn't have a name. You don't name test subjects, then you get attached.
But
since the rain is starting to pick up,
So that was a freak.
on there. All right, guys, what do you say we quit this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Oh, that's a good one too. Roll dice. Roll your own dice.
Yeah.
As a player.
Don't borrow dice from the game master.
Bring
Use
dice.
dice.
Can I borrow some dice?
Oh, suck. Fucking mooch.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons Attribution No Derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.